Hi, welcome back to Russ Recaps. In today's video, I will be explaining a crime and drama movie titled American Gangster, which was released in 2007. Spoilers ahead, so be warned, and let's get started. The movie begins in New York City in November of 1968. A man named Bumpy Johnson and his right-hand man, Frank Lucas, are dousing a man with gasoline in a dark alleyway before lighting the poor man on fire. Frank then shoots the man dead while he's screaming in pain from being burned. Bumpy is a local gangster who controls most of the area in Harlem, and Franklin has been working for him for 15 years. The next day, we see Bumpy giving out turkeys to the residents of West Harlem, which are primarily made of African Americans. Bumpy is popular because he likes to give back to his community. Another time, Franklin is walking together with Bumpy and enters an electronics store. Bumpy complains about how the cheaper Chinese goods distribution is ruining the American market before he suddenly collapses and dies of a heart attack in the store. Bumpy's death shocked many people, and his funeral is being attended by a lot of high-profile individuals, from other gangsters to athletes, celebrities, and even politicians. At the time, nobody knows who Frank is, as he hadn't made a name for himself. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a man named Richie Roberts, who is a detective in New Jersey. Unlike most cops working in his area at the time, Richie is a clean cop who refuses to take any bribe money from the gangsters. At the time, Richie is working on busting a drug cartel by following one of its dealers with his partner, Javier. They see the dealer park the suspected car in a parking lot before leaving the vehicle. The two detectives wait in their car to see who would show up to take the car, but after waiting for a long time, they figured that nobody will show up. They approach the car and open the trunk only to find almost $1 million in cash. Javier proposes that they take the money for themselves, but of course Richie refuses and takes the money back to the police station. As Richie hands the money over to his boss, the rest of the cops, who are dirty, look at him in disdain. They all think that Richie is acting holier than thou by being a stricter, clean cop and refusing to work with the gangsters. One of these dirty cops is a detective named Crowe who works in the narcotics department. He takes the drugs that have been confiscated by the police, then cuts them to become less pure before selling them to the dealers for a very high profit. One of the dealers complains about this fact and the state of the mob scene after Bumpy passed away to Frank while they are making a drug deal. Frank is also unhappy about it. Not to mention that another gangster named Tango now wants to take control over Bumpy's old territory and wants Frank to give him a cut from his drug sales, which Frank refuses. Remembering Bumpy's advice to start a cartel, Frank gets an idea to source the drugs from Vietnam, which is supposedly cheaper and of higher quality, causing American soldiers who are there for the war to get addicted. He contacts his cousin in Saigon and gets a passport to fly there and visits a club, where he witnesses American soldiers using drugs. His cousin arranges a meeting with the drug dealers, but when Frank mentions that he wants 100 kilograms of heroin, his cousin says that they need to go to the factory where they make the drugs instead. So they head to the middle of the jungle where the factory is located, and Frank makes a deal with the owner to ship 100 kilograms of heroin back to the States by smuggling it in the coffins of soldiers being returned to the States with the help of his cousin and some bribe for the other soldiers. Back in New Jersey, Richie gets a phone call from Javier, who is asking Richie to help him get out of a house as he was forced to kill a dealer and is now surrounded by a lot of people. Richie arrives and they pretend that the dealer isn't dead, so they can escape by loading him into an ambulance. In the ambulance, Richie notices that Javier is high on drugs, and that's probably why he killed the dealer, along with stealing the dealer's money. When Javier begs not to be reported, Richie refuses, causing Javier to run away. With Frank also back in New York, his package of drugs successfully arrives in army planes, raising no suspicions. Frank checks the quality of the drugs, which proves to be of much purer quality compared to his competitors. By cutting the distribution line, Frank can sell this pure quality heroin for a cheap price, which he labels as the Blue Magic, and spreads like wildfire in the area. The success of Blue Magic launches Frank into a huge success, branching his business to run several nightclubs and even moving his whole family from North Carolina to New York. While he buys a big mansion for his mother and family, he recruits his brothers to be his distributors in different areas and pays them handsomely for it. Frank walks with his brothers around the neighborhood while teaching them the principles of being a gangster. When he's having a meal with them at a diner, Frank sees Tango on the street and decides to approach him. Frank asks for money from his drug deals, and when Tango dismisses him, Frank shoots him in the head in broad daylight. He returns to the diner as if nothing happened, signifying that he has complete control over the territory. One night, Frank and his brothers are attending an open event in one of his nightclubs. Frank yells at one of them for showing off his wealth, as it will attract attention, which can be dangerous if you are a gangster. During the event, Frank sees a beautiful woman on the dance floor. She introduces herself as Eva, a Puerto Rican beauty queen. Frank is obviously interested in her, and they eventually become a couple. Meanwhile, Richie is notified that Javier was found dead from a drug overdose. When he checks Javier's body in the morgue, he finds a packet of the blue magic in his pocket and decides to take it to investigate further the drug that killed his partner. One day, Richie is approached by a man who wants to recruit him to be the head of the Special Narcotics Bureau branch in New Jersey. Richie will be able to work with a team of his choosing that he deems as clean and capable of taking down big cartels, without having to deal with the dirty cops anymore. Naturally, Richie agrees, and he recruits his specialized team and briefs them about their target, the big cartel that is selling blue magic. However, none of them have any good leads as to who is running the cartel, so they start their investigation on the streets. He wonders how someone can sell such pure heroin at such a low price. Richie and his team continue to follow the smaller dealers until they are led to a car wash, where they tap the phone lines and confirm that it's one of Blue Magic's distribution centers. The team places a big order of Blue Magic while putting trackers in the money that they're paying with, tracking it to New York. However, Richie witnesses that the money is taken by Trupo, and when he asks for the money back, Trupo returns it to him on the condition that Richie and his team stay away from New York and it's not his jurisdiction. Frank's cartel has become the biggest one in New York because of Blue Magic, and he is invited to another cartel boss's house named Dominic Catano. Dominic says that Blue Magic's price is driving down the market, but he's willing to work with Frank to spread Blue Magic sales to more areas. Frank agrees to work with him. One night, Frank and Eva attend a huge boxing match where he wears a flashy coat. Eva bought him and sits beside Dominic. This is noticed by Richie, who went to the match to gather intel, and he tells his team to investigate who Frank is. Trupo also notices Frank and decides to pay him a visit on his wedding day with Eva, asking for $10,000 a month to keep his mouth shut. Realizing his mistake, Frank later throws the flashy coat into the fireplace. Richie's team manages to gather information on Frank's brothers, who are the distributors, and also investigates Frank's simple and unassuming daily routine. Because Frank doesn't really look the part, Richie wants to find out who Frank is working for or which big names are protecting him. He thinks that Frank can't possibly work alone, as Blue Magic sales and influence area are spreading wide. Meanwhile, Frank is faced with some trouble as one of his distributors apparently has been cutting Blue Magic, lowering its quality, but using the brand name to sell it. Frank confronts the distributor in question, Nicky Barnes, and tells him to sell his cut product under a different brand because his practice is ruining Blue Magic's reputation. On his way back, Frank is stopped by Trupo and his men, who find some drugs in Frank's car trunk. Frank instead threatens to blow up Trupo's home if he dares to mess with Frank and his cartel. Frank's influence is massive, as even FBI agents and Richie's old friend all urge and bribe him to stop pursuing Frank's cartel. Of course, Richie refuses them all. On Christmas Eve, Frank finds out that the United States is planning to pull out of the war in Vietnam, threatening his supply chain. With increasing problems and pressures, Frank decides to take his wife on a night out, but they get shot at by an unknown hitman. Fortunately, Eva is fine and Frank only got injured. Frank's brothers want to get revenge, presumably on Nicky, who they suspect hired the hitman, but Frank has another plan. He calls Dominic, suspecting that one of his men is connected to Nicky, but Dominic only says that Frank's success is bringing him all of his troubles. Things get worse for Frank as the US Army finally ends the war in Vietnam. He flies to Saigon to arrange another way to transport the drugs. While in New York, one of Frank's brothers is arrested by Richie when he was trying to shoot his own wife. Richie threatens to put him in prison if he doesn't help them with the investigation, so they manage to put a wire on Frank's brother and record his conversation with Frank, who gives him a code for the army plane number that's bringing in their drug. Richie and his team search the whole plane and find nothing. When Richie wants to inspect the coffin, he is stopped by a high-ranking officer for making the military look bad. He doesn't give up and follows the coffins until he sees that the drug is really there, and before being transported to another warehouse, after obtaining a warrant, Richie's team ambushes the warehouse. On the other hand, Trupo also searches Frank's house, finding a large amount of cash hidden under the doghouse. All of this leads to Frank's inevitable arrest. In jail, Frank tries to bribe and threaten Richie to no avail. However, he figures out that Richie only wants revenge on the dirty cops and the other drug cartels. So Frank offers to work with Richie to give him all the information about the cartels and the cops they work with in exchange for a reduced sentence. This leads to the conviction of around 3/4 of New York City's Drug Enforcement Agency. After they are finished, Richie chooses to quit to defend Frank in court, which leads him to only getting a 15-year sentence. Frank is released in 1991 and continues to be friends with Richie. That's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and tell us what you think about these recaps and what you want to see next in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.